please give Chris a warm welcome.
All right. Now, before we go into all the detailed stuff, I want to explain a little bit about what we are going to do in these two shows. And let me start with this little intro. And yeah, welcome to everyone. My name is Christian Hecker. I'm from Germany. I'm doing digital art since 2001 and more professionally since 2008. And that's the places where you can generally find me and where I'm most active. And here we have a summary of the hardware that I used for this scene. So it's not a super high-end machine, no 64 gigabytes RAM, just 32. And that certainly limits some of the stuff you can do, especially in 3D. Nonetheless, it's enough for me. And this presentation will go through a number of tools. JSPlacement for the kind of abstract height field creation view, and then a little portion in DAZ, and last but not least, Photoshop. In JSPlacement, we explore what we can do with it, and that's mostly creating patterns that can be used for height fields or displacements. In View, yeah, the stuff we normally do in View, create scenes, import models, create the height fields, and adding materials, ecosystems, and last but not least, preparing the render for postwork. In DAZ, like I said, a small portion just to check out how to export assets for View properly and how to bring them into our scene. And in Photoshop, that's the last part. We explore how to use multipass renders and how to get the most detail out of your renders. And that's the first step we want to look into. But before we do that, I want to say that this presentation, much like my other previous presentations, will be a mixture of practical explanations and theory. My previous presentations were more theory-based, but with this one, we definitely go into more practical stuff and how to apply certain stuff directly within View. And what I'm doing and what I'm showing here and the techniques I'm using are definitely not set in stone. Everyone is approaching certain things differently, and so I want to make this this webinar a little bit of a collaborational thing. So if you think there's stuff I could do a little more efficiently, then let us know in the chat. And I think we can learn from each other here. And before we go into the practical stuff with JSPlacement, I also want to show you the final products that we will end up with, and that's the full scene. With the height fields and the terrain created with JSPlacement, a number of buildings right here, and some train tracks that go through the scene, and of course some trains. Right, there's one, pretty small, just a small detail to add some life to the scene. And in the background, we have an ecosystem for a background cityscape to fill up that space back there. So the area here can best be described as some sort of park area for this bigger city in the background. So it's maybe something where the people from the city find some rest and some peace and yeah, some recreational area. And that's basically the scene as a quick overview. And let's take a look at the Photoshop file. And we are working with Photoshop CC. That's the latest version. But I can say that everything we do in Photoshop here would be able with Photoshop CS5, probably CS4. So nothing too special. And here we have a kind of final version of the scene with some depth of field going on to create some depth, and that's the Lightroom version. I tend to go through Adobe Lightroom as a final step just to check colors and have some fun there. Most of the time I find some settings that enhance the overall look of the image, and that's the pure Photoshop version, and so on. Clouds here are basically the ground fog. That's what we will cover later then in view. Some textures and the front as a separate render, and yeah, that's everything that we will cover in view. So with that out of the way, let's go into the practical part, and that's JSPlacement. JSPlacement is, like I said, a pattern creator that can be used for mostly used for displacement maps or height fields, and it's created by windmill.art.net, and it's a pretty nifty tool that creates some very quick results, and especially for some, as you can see here, some techie looking surfaces. Pretty cool stuff, and it's fairly easy to use. It's randomized. You can turn on and turn off certain settings and features in these patterns. Let's deactivate these lines, and here you can adjust the complexity of the pattern. And what else do we have here? There's a couple of versions, different approaches to these patterns. This one is always pretty interesting since it almost looks like a CPU of sorts. And let's just save this for demonstration purposes in view. And let's create another one. Now this one is still in beta and not really useful, at least not for what we have in mind. At just a minute ago. All right, now this looks pretty interesting as well. Here we have the choice between different packs that include different shapes. We can make these textures seamless as well. So that's pretty handy too. Let's save this one again for showing how this can be applied to view. So, and that's basically JSPlacement. It's very straightforward. It's nothing too complex. Every texture is saved in 8K resolution and is limited, at least right now, to 8-bit color depth. But I spoke to the developer, and he's thinking about adding 16-bit, but he's very busy. So, and this JSPlacement tool is just I think a just for fun thing for him. So who knows when that will be will be added. Okay, that's JSPlacement. The next thing we will look at is how to bring these things, these saved images, into view. And that's fairly simple as well. I think most of you guys have enough experience to understand how this is done. So we are going not through a procedural terrain, we are going through a standard terrain. And here we go. Go into the terrain editor. First thing to turn off is this button, this option. And now to keep not to stress view too much, I will keep the resolution for the terrains at 4K. So working in view will stay as fluid as possible. Because in my experience, and I don't know if that's linked to the fact that I only have 32 gigabytes of RAM, but as soon as I go for 8K terrains, it can be a little frustrating, especially when it comes to reaction times. So let's go with this one. Now we have to keep in mind that we always go to 100%, so we don't mix the terrain with our picture we are adding, so we don't get these waves in here. So 100%. Okay. All right. Now we are having this in our terrain editor. Now, sometimes depending on what hardware you have in your machine, it can be a good thing to activate this show entire scene option, because it reduces the I think the polygon count in this preview and is easier to handle. That's what I do when working with 8K terrains, because it's much more fluid. Let's check out the graph. Now, here's a question for you guys, because I don't know how it is with this. I think you can delete this fractal stuff without any problems. Am I right? Because we don't actually need it, and it should be enough to just connect our texture map to the altitude. And well, let's try it. So view isn't confused by the extra stuff we have here. Okay, let's go back to check in the terrain editor. It should work. Now, it's a little too deep for my taste, so make it a little more flat. And this looks pretty cool. And let's apply this. All right, here we go. So that's how you bring in these terrains into view. Let's do a quick test render. And yep, looks good. Let's try to add a texture. So we now you can go in, and we have saved a second pattern. So let's mix these two. And for that, let's go into the function graph again. Just copy this node. And Let's load the other pattern we saved. Unfortunately, it always takes a while before this before the window comes up to choose from other textures. I'm still not sure why that is. Oh, that's a good question. Good question. No, it's for Mac and Linux, I guess. So when we're just here, just check some of the artwork that's done with this stuff. So it's really cool. It's a really cool tool that can be used for some pretty damn cool stuff. All right, here we are. Let's go for the other one, and let's add a blender. There. Okay. Why isn't that working now? Come on. Try combiner. So now we have combined these two terrains, and that's what we get from it. So let's OK this, and it looks much more complex again, of course. Let's do a quick test render of that. And yeah, definitely much more complexity in this one. Let's zoom in a little bit so we get more of the detail. Of course, the closer you move in with the camera, the more the quality of the height field falls apart. But let's take this one as a reference for the 4K resolution, and let's just try to up this resolution to 8K. As far as I know, JSPlacement uses PNG format as a standard. Of course. Let me just show you the quality difference. This is the 4K resolution, and this is the 8K resolution. It's a little more defined, and the edges are quite a bit clearer. And of course, let's invert invert these height fields. Absolutely no big deal. We just go in there, click here, and invert the colors. And let's do this here as well. Okay, this, and let's move out. Now these test renders, because the terrains are so detailed, will take a little bit to move all this data into the memory, I guess. And yeah, that takes a while. That's why the rest of the webinar will be with terrains in 4K instead of 8K. That's a good question. I have to counter that question with what is a contour map? So this is the inverted version of the terrain. Looks a little bit different, but not too much. I mean, of course, everything is inverted. These lower areas are now on top here. And yeah, that's basically how you can import these terrains into View. And that's the demonstration for this. Before we go ahead and import the terrains for our scene, are there any additional questions? Now, Christy Jonas, I hope I didn't butcher that name. I'm using a Windows PC, and I have never. Okay, that's not correct. I have once touched a Apple PC, Apple computer, and wasn't too impressed with it. And I'm pretty much a Windows guy through and through. A line drawing of topography. As long as it's saved as a bitmap, it shouldn't be a problem to import it into View. That should be possible. It depends. The appearance then in View depends on how a contour map specifically looks. So TGA format works fine too. I personally tend to go with PNG and TIFF format, and so far it served me best. So let's go ahead and import the terrains for our actual scene. For that, we create a new terrain. That's pretty much what I just did with the quick demo. But I have a couple of settings I want to apply so it matches the stuff we have going on in our scene. Again, raising the quality to 4K. Then loading the height field. And again, it takes a while to come up. Now, Paul, if you have questions or anything, as soon as you see that something takes a while, just go ahead. So here we have our terrains of our actual scene. And the first one we will add is this one. Okay. Again, we want to have this one appear a little flat. Check the graph. Now, since we have the blender completely on 1, which basically means that it's only using our height field, I think we can keep this fractal in there. It won't hurt the overall performance, I guess. So this is our main terrain, and we have three layers with these terrains, and we will get into that in a minute. And this one is our base terrain. It's the foundation of our landscape. And let's make this one a little larger. And let me check some values here. All right, now we have moved this this terrain a little bit lower because we want to use the ground, and the ground we want to use as a ocean, let's say ocean, to bring some detail into the background later. Now this distant water material works perfectly fine for this. And let's name this ground and water. And let's zoom out a bit. Do a quick test render. It's you are never too old to learn new stuff. Yeah, well, maybe you can be too young, but especially with 3D, it's very demanding, and you should at least be, I think, like 12 or 13, around that age. But you can definitely start with art earlier when it comes to drawing and painting. It's amazing, man. So now we go ahead and create a second layer, second terrain layer, and let's call this tech layer 1. Tech because of this weird kind of CPU-like, mainboard-like pattern we have going on in these terrains. For that, we go back into the terrain editor and add a different height field. And that's this one. And here you can see what this button up here does, show entire scene. What it does is it shows every element that is in the scene, not just the terrain we are working on. So it's great if you need some orientation for where certain elements in your scene are, and you want to adjust or manipulate your terrain in a certain way. You always know where something is in your scene. If we deactivate this, we get our the terrain we are actually working on. Again, in a higher resolution. And as you can see down here, probably, the edges are very aliased, I guess is what you use the term, and not very round. Now the question is, could you create patterns like these with the function editor in view? Probably, but it would take quite some time to set up something that resembles the stuff we can do in 30 seconds in JSPlacement, even though in JSPlacement we have some missing detail. And when you create this in the function editor, it's all vectors and everything is clean and smooth. But like I said, it will take ages to set up something like this in the function editor. Let's OK this, and let's move this one a little higher. Oh, and now I recognize that I missed to do something, because we want the bottom side, we want that transparent, or we want their areas to look through. So back into the terrain editor, and let's use this, and we have deleted, or not deleted, but cut off some of the terrain, so we have some space to make our underlying terrain more visible again. Do another quick, well, let's do a test render to see how this looks now. That's right down there in the terrain editor here, the altitudes, the clipping, so to say. And if you move the slider, you can see how it makes stuff visible and makes stuff appear and disappear. So that's a pretty neat thing to selectively kind of adjust what areas you want to have visible in your terrain. And yeah, that's a quick test render with these two terrains. Now this starts to look like something. Now what we want to do with this one as well is to rotate it 90 degrees, because now we copy this and undo this rotation and move this tech layer number 2 a little higher, so we have 3 layers of these terrains now that will create our main part of the scene. And that's basically how we bring in these terrain for our these terrains for our scene. Let's do another quick test render. And now it started fairly quickly, because all the data of the terrains is already in the memory, and that's when the test renders start to appear quite fast. And yeah, that's our main terrain setup. Let's do a quickie here as well. Now let's change the sun setting so the shadows aren't as confusing. And we get to see more of the terrain without these noisy shadows. Looks like something. So that concludes the part on how to bring in the terrains in our scene. And the next part would be materials and ecosystems. Paul, any more questions? Okay. So I continue? Okay. So our next part, like I said, materials and ecosystems, and that will make our terrains start look like real terrains with a abstract touch. And for that, we deactivate tag layer 1 and tag layer 2. So we focus on the base terrain first. And for that terrain, we will go with a standard material that comes with view, and that's rock and grass. And let's take a look. Okay. Not too exciting, but it will do its job. And next we apply a ecosystem to this material. We will use the heightfield map as a alpha map to define where we plant our ecosystem or where we plant our trees. So to make this cover the whole object, we switch to object parametric for this ecosystem layer, and we name this ecosystem layer forest eco. And let's load a tree for this, and not this one. Let's go with this one. Everything standard, everything comes with view, so no extra objects yet. When we go to the buildings, there will be some DAS 3D shop material, but up until now, it's all stuff that comes with view. Now we have our ecosystem in place, and what I'm doing here, populate it and just have a look. Now this looks very dark. Just finish this one. And yeah, pretty much chaotic, and the trees are too big in size. So before we adjust the density and the scaling of the trees, let's apply this alpha map I was talking about. And for that, again, adding a projected texture map, connecting it to the alpha, and load it. Now you don't have to go through this button down there. You could also go through where are we? There. We could just use this method, just drag and drop. And that's probably quicker. Go back to the settings, and well, let's just have a look at how this looks now. Already looks different. than to what we had before. Let's just check that's what we had without the mask or the alpha. That's what we have with the alpha now. Still very chaotic. So let's raise the overall density to 80%. Populate. And let's have another quick look. You can already see that these areas that are a little higher contain less trees than the areas that are more on the ground. And that's what we have now with adjusted density. That's without adjusted density and the alpha map, and that's without the density and without the alpha map. Now let's do something for the scaling. Let's try 0.5. Populated, and as you can see, we jumped from 20,000 to 109,000. And now it starts to kind of make sense. And let's do another quick test render so you can see what changed. Now the problem is that we have trees in our water areas down there. Let's just get rid of these by adjusting the altitude range. Good. Everything I show you guys today is self-taught. I never visited a university or college or something for graphic design. It all came to me through a long years of learning by doing, trying out stuff, and yeah, watching videos on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. Now, when I started out with digital art, the internet wasn't as big as it is now. It's amazing how much you can learn by yourself today just by checking out YouTube tutorials. We didn't have that in like 2006 and 2007 or 8. It just started, and now it's much easier because people like me sit down and record stuff for YouTube or for events like Digital Art Live. So it's much easier today than it was back then. So you guys definitely have it a little easier, and you can collect your knowledge much faster. And yeah, so I'm pretty much self-taught, and it has its advantages, but the downside is that you need a little bit longer to understand this stuff, and you have to do it all by yourself, and that's not always the best way to go. So going to a school certainly gives you some good basics to work from. Now, like I said, we have some trees here in the water areas. We don't want them, so we go into the presence tab and in the altitude constraints and limit the altitude range. And just a reminder, we had 109,000, pretty much 110,000. Now populate, and we go down to 64,000. Now, Now that's funny. We have only the trees in the lower areas. Let's just for fun create a test render. But what we want is the trees on top of these on top of these square areas. For that, let's go back into the material and the ecosystem, and let me just check my notes quick. Okay, let me just go back into the alpha for a second. And now I actually have created a separate mask for these ecosystems that are not 8K and just 4K, just to have it not so memory expensive. So just replaced this map, and let's try and invert this and populate this again. Now the trees are still down there. Why are they still down there? Let me just check again. Okay. Now we have them on top. Yep. Yeah, that shows that I'm far from perfect in this stuff, and there is this view galleries group on Facebook, and there are some people that are probably a little more little better with this with all this. The stuff I know about Vue is basically only the stuff I need for my projects, and that doesn't include all of Vue. So yeah, I'm not super perfect in this too. Nonetheless, let's move on and go into tech layer number 2 and activate this and give that one a material as well. For this, let's try dry grass, and let's do a quick test render. Looks almost the same like the base terrain layer, but oops, that's okay. And for that, we create a ecosystem layer as well. Call this forest eco 2 and set this to object parametric and add an alpha here as well. Now we use a 4K version of the texture or map we used for the terrain. And for the tree, let's just try this blue spruce. Let's try this one. All right, let's populate it. Let's just deactivate this base terrain from the render, so we only see our tech layer number 2. And that's the ecosystem there. Of course, we go in and adjust some of these settings. Scaling, let's try 7.5 and populate. Now that's very, very dense. That's 155, maybe a little too much. Let's try this. Do another render. JSPlacement, Peter, can only be used for these techie-looking abstract kind of shapes. For natural-looking terrains, you should probably look at a world machine, but that's not free. So yeah. Now with FilterForge, I don't have experience. You could create, Dave, you could create a wall by going through the spline tool in View. And that's something I hope I can explain when we are in the chapter that explains how to create these train tracks that I have in the scene. And that will enable you to create walls to a certain degree. Okay, let's go back to our tech layer number 1. Now, this is the render with the adjusted settings, but we have one more thing we want to apply, and that's an altitude range again. Populate, and pay this, and do another quick test render. Now we have a couple of free areas right here, and these will be later used for placing buildings, and just to have some areas that are not jungle and forest. So this looks a little more, yeah, like a controlled environment and more, yeah, human influenced and not too organic, because the shapes of the terrains themselves suggest that this is not really a natural environment. Let's activate the base terrain and let's do another quick test render with both terrains. And that looks pretty chaotic, at least now. Let's just play around and try a different angle. Zoom in a little bit. So yeah, we definitely have a very artificial vibe going on with the terrains and how the trees are planted on these terrains. All right. Well, last but not least, the tech layer number 2. And for that, we basically do do the same we did with tech layer number 1 and load a material. Well, let's try something different. Snowy purple stripes. For this tech layer number 2 terrain, we will not add a ecosystem because that's the topmost terrain layer, and if we would add trees there as well, it would look far too chaotic and wouldn't help the overall appearance of the scene. So we leave it ecosystem, we leave out the ecosystem and just keep the kind of mainboard, circuit board patterns for this. And let's try it with all the terrains activated and have a quick look at it. Now this starts to look like something. So as soon as we start to add some buildings to this one, it will definitely look like some artificially created landscape by some advanced futuristic race, or like futuristic kind of human race, especially with the look of the buildings. Let's try another quick test with a close-up. So what these 3 layers do in the end, in the final image, is to give the viewer of the scene a lot of stuff to discover, and maybe the viewer will be a little confused where what element of the scene actually is when it comes to position and height. But the more I look at this image, I have a lot of fun to look at the different layers and how it all goes together, and kind of creates a complete image, even though it may appear a little bit chaotic. So this pretty much concludes the adding of the materials and the ecosystems. Now, the problem we have now is that we only have this this one terrain, and if we want to have a wide open scene, we need more to fill the space in the background right here. And for that, we can pretty easily group our terrains for organizational setup. It's best to create separate layers, so you can put all this stuff into, you can organize this stuff a lot better. Let's create a copy of our 3 terrains that are grouped, and let's go and maximize this view. Let's move this there and switch the sides. Switch the sides. And now let's take both of them, create copies, and move these up there.